Shall I?
Go right ahead.
Okay, cool. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Todd Coley. I'm a principal and landscape architect with Smith Group. I'm also part of the Northern California ASLA Chapter's Executive Committee. So on behalf of the chapter, thank you for joining our talk today. I just want to do a few housekeeping notes. If you're comfortable, if you could please turn on your camera, as we've gotten a lot of comments from the past that since we've all been working from home that we're in isolation, and it'd be great to see other people. For those of you who want to know who's on the executive committee, you'll see ASLA, NCC in front of their names. So those people with that on their name, on their little video, that's who's on the executive committee. And last, I just wanted to be sure that everyone knows how to use the chat function in Zoom to send any questions that you might have during the presentation today. Before I continue on describing what's happening with the presentation today, I'm going to turn it over to Krista, who as of yesterday is our new president of the chapter. She'd like to give some welcoming remarks.
Hi everyone, I'm Krista Van Hove, incoming president. Thank you, Todd, for the introduction. I also am a campus planner at Stanford University. I just want to do a quick plug because we've got some really great opportunities with this coming year. Now that a lot of our events are virtual, doesn't mean that they're any less work. So if you're interested in events like today's and you'd like to be a part in helping us put some of these together, please email. I'll put my email in the chat and you can let me know if you're interested in volunteering.
Excellent. Thanks, Krista. Well, let's talk about Lunch with Leaders. This is a new program that we've started this past summer. Hopefully you've seen that in the chapter's social media channels. We started the series off with Pamela Conrad, Alma de Solier, and Rosa Sheng. If you've missed them and you want to watch them, it's on our chapter's website and it's on our YouTube channel. Today, of course, we have Jacinta McCann, and the remaining speakers for the year include Tom Morose, the National Incoming ASLA President, and John Lays of Sherwood Design. We're slowly working on vetting a list for 2021, and we hope to have a new graphic out prior to the end of the year.
Good. So you're set up
Today we have the pleasure of listening to Jacinta McCann, the Global Design Advisor at AECOM, based here in San Francisco. Jacinta graduated in 1981 from the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, and practiced in Sydney for 18 years before moving to San Francisco in 1999. Jacinta joined EDAW in Sydney in 1991, and then when she moved to San Francisco, led that office with a range of leadership roles at both regional and global levels, and joined AECOM in 2005. She's worked on large-scale urban regeneration projects, including the Sydney Olympics, Mission Bay in San Francisco, Nova Luz in Sao Paulo, Bonifacio Global City in Manila, and the Los Angeles waterfront. She and I have traveled together to the Philippines, Japan, England, and UAE for projects during my tenure at EDAW and AECOM. Her professional appointments include President of the Landscape Architecture Foundation, the San Francisco Bay Conservation Development Commission Design Review Board, the University of New South Wales faculty of the Built Environment Advisory Board. She was honored in 2014 by the San Francisco Business Times as one of the 100 most influential businesswomen in the Bay Area. She's also been a member of the Urban Land Institute since 2001, serving on various global capacities. Jacinta is also a fellow of both the American Society of Landscape Architects and the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects. On behalf of the chapter, please welcome my friend Jacinta.
Well, thank you so much, Todd. And I'm going to share my screen now. It's great to see everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Let me just get this working here. It should be this. Can you guys see this now? Todd, can you see this?
No, not yet.
Okay, let me just go back. Sorry, let me just, yeah. Hang on. Sorry, I just thought that should come up. Let me just try something else here. Can you see a PowerPoint now or not?
Nope.
Okay, that's weird. Okay, let me just, sorry guys. I'm just going to,
There's April Phillips.
okay, well, just relax everyone while I, this is sort of weird. Select the application I want to share. Okay, let me just, it should be opening up. Let me just.
Does Todd need to give you access? Does he need to hand it off to you?
Have I been made the presenter?
Yeah, I think so. Laura, have you done that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone can, she can share.
Okay, I've got it now.
Okay.
You should be able to see it now. Yeah. It just took a while for it to actually
Yep,
show.
we can see it now, Jacinta, and it's in, as soon as you push presentation mode, we'll
Yeah, you
be
got
full
it.
screen.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay, so look, Todd, thanks very much for the intro. That was a lovely intro. And Krista, congrats on your incoming leadership role there with the NCC president. Thank you very much for that. And Blake, thanks for your great service this past year. So I'm excited to have a few minutes to talk to you about some things that have informed my career. I will probably forget half of what I thought I might talk about, so I will go through it and hopefully there'll be a few minutes for questions. But I called this presentation The Bigger Picture, which is a bit of a riff on a book that our firm published back in 2009. And it was a book that really informed our philosophy and sort of crystallized how we thought about practice and the firm at the time. So it was very important, and it took several years to bring together, and it weighed 6 pounds. So fun fact, you really want to avoid producing a book that weighs 6 pounds because no one could carry it around to give it to people, but it's a brilliant book. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, for me, what the bigger picture has meant in some influential points in my career, and so a little bit of context, a little bit of history, things that have really shifted the trajectory of my career path. And then I'm going to talk about 2 projects, the Sydney Olympics and a project in the Philippines called Navali, which both of which really informed the way I thought about practice. So in the book that we published, the opening sentence of the book, it's funny, I hadn't looked at this for several years, and the opening sentence is, "Climate change has emerged as the defining issue of our time." And this book was, we published it in 2009, and clearly climate change was a force to be reckoned with before then, but it's just become even more compelling 11 years on. And in the book, in the introduction, we also talked about the 1968 Christmas Day photograph, beamback of the world taken by Apollo 8 on Christmas Day. And it was the first time that the world had been seen in this way. And it really reminded everyone of how fragile and how finite our resources are in the world. And it certainly framed up, I think, the way in which we thought about the world from then on. So I started my education in landscape architecture in the mid-70s, and it was in the middle of a global petroleum crisis, gas shortages, as well as a real awareness of what we had been doing for so long in terms of damaging the environment. And so there was a really heightened awareness in the mid-70s about this when I was at university, and it framed the way in which we thought about the environment and the urgency we were learning about. In fact, we had a textbook that we used in our course, and it projected that there would be no more petroleum left in the world by the year 2000. which was an interesting projection. I just wrote out a very short timeline. Of course, I've been practicing for almost 40 years, and so a lot has happened during those 4 years, but I just characterize this in the 4 decades. And so, you know, my first 10 years, 1980 to 1990, was very much about the formation of me as a practicing professional. And I would say testing scale and leadership was something that really emerged during that period. I worked for a multidisciplinary architecture, planning, landscape architecture firm in the 80s. And there was the images across the bottom screen here was really a hugely important project that shaped me and in the 80s. And it was the
I don't want to hear it. It just makes me upset. So that's the end.
it was the new headquarters for the IBM in Australia, and it was a 60,000 square meter building with a series of pods and a core. It was set in a forest. I had the ability to learn everything from planning, to learn everything related to this project anyway, working at planning scale through design, water features, landscape, as well as a very interesting program of bushland regeneration, which exists to today in Australia. And this woman here in this picture, Joan Bradley, established this methodology for regeneration of native bushland areas, and volunteers come in and in a very precise way cut out weeds and help native species to regenerate. And so I was deeply entrenched in that program. And then I would say another heavy influence in the first decade of my work was really stemmed from Ian McCann, and that's him sitting. He visited Sydney, and we took him out on a boat and talked about all of the issues to do with planning in Sydney in that period. But when I was at university, landscape planning at larger scale was something that was very important, and it was all based on McCann's work. The second decade, 1990 to 2000, I joined EDAW. I was in Sydney. It was a period of great growth, big leaps. I'm going to talk about the Olympics and how that impacted me, but it was a big period of urban growth and parallel with what was happening over here at that time. And then 2000 to 2010, in a way, was about career reinvention for me. I had worked for almost 20 years in Sydney, very established career, and then came over to San Francisco, and everything was new and different. And I really had to rethink how I communicated about design or planning, how I really thought about things, because there were a lot of subtle differences here. And I would say, I just put this phrase engrenage there, but I think in that decade, engrenage means all of the gears working together in sync. And I think a lot of things were in sync in that decade for me. And then 2010 to 2020, you know, very much a global framing to my work, resiliency, a very big thing, and then this sort of bigger leadership roles. But underpinning all of this, and if I look at the trajectory through the last 4 decades, volunteering, participating in professional groups like ASLA or other groups has provided the springboard for lots of opportunities. So in terms of my career, there's been this duality between San Francisco and Sydney, and I like maps, so I've just put these 2 maps up. But one of the things that's very interesting is we talk about both cities as large waterfront cities, but if you look at Sydney Harbour compared to the bay in San Francisco, you can really see there's a very big difference in terms of the scale of water and these days the resiliency challenges related to sea level rise. You can also just see the differences in population and GDP, much bigger here, of course. And this is the same scale, but again, just shows just the pattern of development or cleared land, but development in grey versus white for cleared land, and then green for uncleared land or forested land. And you can just see the distribution of urban development the pattern is quite different because of the framing of the bay, much more linear. transportation routes have followed similar patterns. So thinking about scale and leadership, you may question why I've grouped this together, and this is just a reflection on my career and opportunities that came along, but it seemed to me that somehow scaling up the complexity of projects for me corresponded with the steep learning curve on leadership and how to really influence how projects are undertaken with that complexity. So I wanted to just tell you a story about really something that was a launching pad for me. When I was 30, I was appointed to the inaugural board for the National Capital Planning Authority in Canberra, Australia. And Canberra is the capital city of Australia. I would never have been appointed to this board except that I had been really active in the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects, ASLA's equivalent in Australia. And this board was being formed. The federal government was ceding Canberra to local jurisdiction, very much how Washington, D.C., what happened in Washington, D.C. is very similar. And they approached the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects, and because they wanted to have a landscape architect on the board, and they wanted diversity. And anyway, my name came up, and I spent 3 years on this board, where we were overseeing the writing of a detailed policy plan for Canberra and for the Australian Capital Territory, which surrounds Canberra. And it was a time of great growth for me because each month I would spend 2 days in Canberra reviewing projects, but also reviewing policy and helping to frame policy and working with all of the experts in the authority. But it opened my mind to policy, which my training had been design, not really planning. So it gave me an insight into how you can influence, really influence long-term growth and characteristics of a city and a community through policy. And this is just an image for those of you who have not been to Australia. This is I was on the board from 89 to 92, and in 1988, new Parliament House was built, this earth-sheltered, really amazing building that Aldo Jurgala designed. Old Parliament House is there in front, and this photo was taken from the War Memorial looking down, and this is the War Memorial here, and this is the Parliamentary Triangle in Australia. So you can see the pattern of new town development. They call it the Y plan in Canberra. So very interesting place to be involved. So, and I would say a recurring theme, if I trace the trajectory of my career, has been the added opportunity and learning about leadership that's come from involvement with different professional organizations. So I want to talk a little bit about the Sydney 2000 Olympics. It's a long time ago, and in fact, a few weeks ago was the anniversary of the opening of the Olympics. But this was an event that challenged everything for the leaders in Sydney, and really challenged all of the planning and design professionals who were associated in delivering these games in a finite time frame and building all of the designing and building all the venues. So the core facilities were located at a place called Homebush, which is these days about a 20-minute drive from its inner ring development. Primarily single-family homes, but these days, much higher through policy change, much higher concentrations of density around transit. But this older photograph just shows this is where the Olympic Village is, which I was deeply involved in, and you can see here this was a really dirty industrial setting for the Olympic Games. This water was heavily contaminated. These industrial sites were heavily contaminated, and the site itself for the Olympics was highly contaminated. So the bid, one of the big underpinning features of the bid was a detailed commitment to sustainability. And you know, this seems like it's just accepted, has been accepted for so long. But back in 1993, which was when the bid was won by Sydney, the word sustainability, the ideas about performance criteria were all brand new. Nothing had been thought about in this way before, and so there was a massive cleanup undertaken. There were equity commitments that were core to the bid, and then there was a legacy commitment. And this photograph that I'm showing here is actually a more recent photograph and shows the higher density development and changes in land use that associated with transit that have happened since then. And the delivery of the Olympics was something that I still think is a model that does not really happen these days, but everything we did from planning through to construction had Greenpeace and other oversight to measure that the projects were being delivered to metrics. And I mean, it does happen these days, but it happened in a really rigorous way for the Olympics. The village that I worked on was a joint venture by the two largest developers in Sydney at that time. There were lots of unusual features for the bid associated with the Olympic game overlay. And this produced a really complicated and challenging, and from the standpoint of you know, working on this project and other projects, we worked on a number of other projects as well in this period to deliver the games, was just stretching us all the time in terms of leadership, speed, decision, you know, making really good decisions. This is the village here, and this photograph was taken right at the time of the Olympics. And you know, there was some big moves that happened with the village, and one of them was actually taking a concrete channel. This creek had been put into a concrete channel, and we completely changed this. There was a massive cleanup along here. This was all contaminated adjacent to this area, and then we built this village. The village itself, total area that we had to plan and design for was 650 acres, but the developed area we concentrated as much as possible to 225 acres, and mix of housing and apartments. And the sustainability plan set out, again, things that may not seem so accepted these days, but were something that was really groundbreaking back then, and I think set the foundation for certainly how I thought about practice from 2000 on. You know, housing, there were many features associated with the housing to minimize energy. We had a power station home bush, we called it. Again, things that are now done on a much more, you know, much more common way, but still a lot more of this needs to be happening with microgrids and so on. And then some dramatic moves with the site. And then with water and landscape, you know, a lot of things that, again, best practices. And there were a lot of legacies from this project that really shaped the way in which development continued to, development was undertaken following this. So, you know, a very, for me, a real, you know, it was a real groundbreaking and shifting project in my career. Now I'm going to shift gears here and just share a little bit about a project which required completely different attitudes to both planning and design at scale, because it was located in a developing country, in Manila, in the Philippines. I first started working in the Philippines in 1997, and we started this project in 2005, and it was a very large project, 5,000 acres, and you know, the site was very interesting with a series of ravines, a little historic town, Canlabang. The site had formerly been used for growing sugarcane in its past. But what I really want to talk about is, you know, the challenges of the gear shifting that you have to make in the way you approach your work when you're working in a developing country. And over the past 20 years, I've seen Manila and the Philippines evolve dramatically, but But you know, when I first started working there, it was extremely difficult to get around. I just felt so compelled coming from a developed country to a developing country like Manila, with working for clients like the Ayala Group, who had tremendous vision for what they wanted to accomplish. Just felt so a higher level of responsibility to be able to provide advice that would be helpful, but not be naive and not suggesting things that simply couldn't be done. Manila is a vibrant place, very dense urban area. There are huge challenges there. Even today, poverty is a major issue. And certainly when I first went there, slums were very evident. And over the last 20 years, with the stabilizing political system there in the early 2000s, a lot started to improve, and development could be undertaken with more confidence, and the financial markets there became more stable. And so banking became more stable. And so, you know, we really saw the emergence of a middle class, and the type of environments and housing and transportation and all of the things that come with a more developed economy. Metro Manila itself, this was our client's headquarter building. Metro Manila, we've done a lot of work around this area, which I'm not talking about today, but you know, a tremendous amount of evolution in recent years, but this is still the reality. It used to be worse. This project that I'll show a few more slides on a bad day took 4 hours for us to get out to the site at the beginning. These days, on a good day, you can get out there in 50 minutes. But you know, this is how dramatic and what an incredible impact traffic has. This new town, basically, that we planned and designed the first phase of, is located to the south of Manila. This arrow just points out Canlabang, where it is. And the vision for this, which really stemmed in many respects from, this is, bear in mind, 2005, but you know, this tidal wave of awareness about sustainability, and our clients really took this on board. And you know, part of our contribution as the team, the foreign consultants coming over, was to think about ways in which we could incorporate things into the plan and into all dimensions of the plan, well beyond the physical planning, to be able to accomplish a more sustainable and more healthy community. This was the plan that we developed, and for those, many of you work on larger scale projects like this, but you know, there were some major features that helped shape the direction of the plan. It was very important to be able to get some early wins, but you know, very large site, mixture of housing, and very interestingly in this project, the range of housing included affordable housing, and defined with parameters relevant to the Philippines. But you know, again, this type of project was truly, you know, shifted the ground for quality of environment and opportunity for families to have. There was a whole building built in stage 1, dedicated to not only sales, but a large area dedicated to talking about the features and the ambitions for this development that would separate it from others. And these are some shots of some of the first stage of the development. And if you look at it through our eyes in America, you would say, well, nothing really special about this. But in Manila at that time, to have the opportunity to have green space, trees, opportunities for biking, walking, getting on the water, these were really dramatic changes. And what I love about Manila, and I love this about our client, they were constantly looking around the world at what was going on and would bring ideas back. So things like bike share or other activities came into the project, and it was really exciting to see how quickly some of those activities could come in. And the planning design of this new town corresponded to a wonderful awakening of healthy lifestyle for folks in Manila, and it's really hot there. So I've always admired this change that happened, but people get out and jog and walk and bike and run, and it's so fantastic to see the way in which this has happened in the last 10 to 15 years and the way in which you can really plan for that. The open space framework was a really important part of the plan, and again, some of the things that made this a very, for me, a project that had enduring impact was just being able to think through how a conservation plan might work on this site, bringing models for conservation management or actual overall management of a site with significant open space, long-term open space in it. And we had many discussions with the client about this, and we laid out different ideas, some of which have been adopted, some of which, you know, were beyond the capacity at that time to adopt. But, you know, we really studied the interface very carefully between the neighborhoods which were developed as secure enclaves, which actually created another challenge really for the project, but something we worked very hard on, to have this connective tissue, the roads and the open space, to really connect the communities despite the security that was needed around the individual neighborhoods. A lot of effort put into the road network and hierarchy and transit and planning for the future. So even though this main boulevard is not built out in full now, the space is there to be able to bring in transit in the future, and the bike paths, of course, were built right at the beginning. So, you know, a very different mindset needed for this, a huge stretch assignment, making the shift to planning and design in a very different economically framed and community and culturally framed environment. I just put this slide in because we had many workshops, and, you know, the way in which ideas were generated were never just from one person, always, you know, generated together with the client, bringing a very large team of experts spanning everything from transportation planning through to ecology, economics, engineering, all together to really try and hammer out what type of programs, what type of opportunities there could be to set this development apart, to make it regionally significant and have, you know, long-term sustainability. And, you know, these just some construction shots, but it was, you know, really a very important client partnership to do this. So really, that's the end of the presentation, Todd, and I'm very happy to go to questions. I left a lot out that I thought I might mention, so hopefully there might be some questions and we can have a conversation for a few minutes.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really thankful for you to present. I actually learned a few things that I didn't know even while I was working at EDAW. So it was really cool to listen in on some projects I knew a little bit about, but more in depth was really great. I'm gonna wait for a few people to do some inserting of questions in the chat box. I do have one. I know that you and I spoke a little bit yesterday. I did not know this about you, about the National Capital Planning position that you held. If I may ask your age or confirm your age, I think you said that you were 30 when you got appointed to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
So as part of kind of JEDI, kind of our emerging leaders committee that's part of our executive committee, and you know, growing your career into the numerous global leadership capabilities that you had in organizations as well as EDAW and AECOM, is there any advice for younger people in the profession on what to do to get into a position? I mean, 30 to be part of your country's leadership and advisory committee on planning the land is quite impressive. And I'm sure that many people on this call that are young in their profession would love to have some advice on that.
Yeah, Todd, thanks for bringing that up. And I would say with any of the appointments I've had, this one in particular, I was completely underprepared for it. I felt completely like I was out of my depth. But to your point about how do you find a trajectory to opportunities for leadership, I think it is incremental. It's a step at a time. I started out, like, I can map the trajectory that led to this. You know, I finished at university and immediately became active in the local, I'm going to use the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects, but became active there and just, you know, participated in events, mixed with my peers, mixed with some of the people who were more experienced. I went to conferences. I, you know, tried to learn, tried to have, and certainly made the most of mentors. Really important to have mentors, but in this case, it came directly from being active and taking on different roles. In that first 10 years, I think I ended up being on the admissions committee into the Institute. We used to do interviews, live interviews with people for admission, even though I was very young, you know, but it was, and there were just, I would say, you know, the most important thing is to have yourself out there, put yourself out there. And today there's many more ways of doing that. Technology, of course, and social media and so on. There's many ways for people to recognize what you have to say, what you can contribute. And I would just encourage everyone to do it. And don't be afraid. I mean, honestly, I was shaking in my boots going into those board meetings. But, you know, I gradually felt like I had something to offer, and people, I would also say something else, that when you're younger, people want you to succeed and they want to hear your point of view. And even if you're feeling like, what can I say, that these illustrious people certainly, you know, what can I say that they would appreciate? But they appreciate your point of view because you're coming at it from someone who's fresh to the issues at hand.
That's great. Thank you very much. Kellyanne, if you want to unmute yourself, would you like to ask a question? Or Laura, can you help unmute?
No, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, hello. That was a fabulous presentation, very inspiring. I actually had the opportunity when I was in Sydney to tour. I do a lot of community planning to see the village, and I mean, how innovative to renovate the whole place, brownfield, create a village that then became homes. I mean, just groundbreaking. And both the projects you talked about sound like you had very enlightened clients, but also you still were pushing the boundaries on what you could do with it, right? Which is so exciting. And so I guess my question for you, again, thinking about the audience here, do you have any tips for working with your clients or the public to have projects advance the state of affairs, whether they're already enlightened and you could take it further, or they're still wanting status quo and there would be some other opportunities? Do you have any thoughts on how you can help move things forward as the designer and, you know, not really the ones with the money?
Yeah. Well, Kellyanne, thanks for the question, and I'm so glad you got to see the village. That's really exciting. Look, it's a very good question because you know, the client, the client is the person who really has to make the decisions about the direction things will go in. And one technique that certainly worked for me in the past is to have a client from another project that maybe has pushed the boundaries that you've worked on, connect up with a different client. And we used to do that sometimes. You know, we would have little forums and invite different clients into the forum, or even just to bring, for example, when I was doing a lot of work with the Port of Los Angeles, I was also doing work with the Port of San Francisco, and the Port of San Francisco planners were really interested in what was happening down in Port of Los Angeles, and so we had an event and brought them all together, and that type of transferring of ideas, and from clients that may be pushing the envelope a little more, helps, I think, give another client more confidence that this can work, or just learn more about it as well. So that's just one thought.
Yeah, connecting the peers, right? Peer developers, peer,
Right.
which we do all the time. And so, yeah, great. Thank you.
I have a question. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really great. And thanks for the advice to young professionals to get involved. That's incredible advice and something I hope to do in my career. My question, I was wondering, you were involved in some projects early on in your career that were then the cutting edge of sustainability in landscape design. And I was just kind of wondering how you've seen the profession grow and change in terms of sustainability, and how you've kind of seen the public's perception of landscape architects as a driving force for sustainability change kind of throughout the years.
Okay, that's a great question, Blake. And I'll just start. I'll just pick up on a couple of points, and if I haven't answered it accurately, just come back to me. But one of the things that I think, just back on the Sydney Olympics for a minute, it's a very unusual thing to have development that's has this overriding, national interest to really do the best possible thing. So in that example, that project, we pushed the boundaries on a lot of things, and there was the will to do it and to experiment, but also tremendous resources. We had a team of 24 people working on the village at the peak. Every single one of those homes had a custom designed garden. I mean, we had prototypes, but we had a massive team working on that project, really working through every detail. I would say, as far as perception of landscape art, sustainability as a whole, I mean, I think there's been an overlay, certainly here in the Bay Area, of overlay onto sustainability of the importance of resiliency now, just because of the pressing issues associated with sea level rise in the Bay Area. But I do think that compared to 20 years ago, I think the way in which landscape architects practice today, I think you all, coming through, what makes me so proud of how the profession is evolving is that all of this type of work, performance-based work, is something that's just embedded in the way so many younger landscape architects see practice. So I'm so happy to see that. How the world sees landscape architects, I think, is still, we used to have this saying in our firm, landscape architecture needs to be a first-tier profession. We should not hold back. And I believe that landscape architects, that all of you pushing the boundaries with your clients, making a difference, one step at a time, is making our profession a first-tier profession. And we really should behave that way. We need to believe that. We need to live it, and we need to execute in the way we're working. It was interesting, Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away recently, and that phrase she had, change happens slowly, one step at a time. I think really with the profession, I think it is our time, absolutely our time now. And so for all of you that are coming through, it's just an incredibly important time to be a landscape architect and to take on leadership positions. I'm talking about professionally and in, in life, to really lead, because you all have the education and to be able to make an impact.
Jacinta, if you didn't know, about 5 years ago in China, the People's Congress, whoever does these things, they elevated landscape architecture. It's on the same tier as engineers and architects now. So that's all of China. The profession's huge. Landscape architecture is growing in China like crazy. And so there's more up to, I agree with you 100%, and it's already happening in a huge country. So it's good.
Yeah, Kellyanne, that's a great point. And we should not think about ourselves as a small profession. We are, we may be smaller in numbers, but we have massive impact, and we need to behave that way and execute that way.
I wanted to have a follow-up on that, and then hopefully I can get to Justin Richardson's question that's in the chat. But in the same vein, Jacinta and Kellyanne, just to let you know, Jacinta, Kellyanne was a professor of mine at Penn State. I've known her since the early 90s. And I know that she really helped in Pennsylvania getting out to high schools and promoting landscape architecture. But if you've read some of the recent LAMs over the summer, one of the editor's letters was basically, before the Great Recession, there were about 22 or 23,000 ASLA members. We're now about 15,000, and most economists say that either we're in it now or it's coming. There's something else economically going to happen downward. We have a new committee on our executive board to reach out to students within California, Northern California specifically, and just trying to think about how we get either the numbers up or promote landscape architecture, increase our visibility. Do you have any advice for our committee members of things that we might be able to do to help that? Because we agree with you, it's a first-tier profession.
Well, look, there are tremendous programs going on inside ASLA right now. Landscape Architecture Foundation is putting a big focus on this. And I mean, really, I think everyone's working together on this issue. I think actually at the more local level, like in this chapter, I think, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where you can really get to, a local high school, or where you can maybe figure out some type of mentoring program for, because one of the big issues is, and this applies to diversity as well as in general, attracting people into the profession, is, just being able to help someone who could be a potential student actually appreciate, and for their family to appreciate the value in what a degree in landscape architecture could represent, because these are big investments these days that people have to make, big financial investments. It's a challenge. And so I think, it is all about taking a step at a time, and, and it would be a wonderful thing to see the chapter maybe develop some, or partner in with some of the other programs that may be in the Bay Area and be visible, in some of those programs, build, or some of these other programs as well.
Yeah, I would second that. If of all the members of this committee adopt a local high school or middle school, the guidance counselors are always happy to hear from you. Donate a subscription to LAM. Give them resources they can link to on their websites. I don't know, I haven't been to a high school library in a long time, but help them understand there's like the LAF website and all the case studies and all the interesting things there, and help. So kind of adopt a high school and help them see different opportunities, work with them on a little design for their playground or athletic fields or a little garden. A lot of ways that, but I second Jacinta, like a one-on-one relationship, or with the math teacher, or with the science teacher, or with the art teacher, even the theater, it's what we're designing our spaces, right? So there's a lot of ways to have, and all it takes, you only have to influence one or two people, and then they go out and talk to their friends and their family and can multiply that way.
I'm going to nominate both of you to Krista to be advisors on our committee. I want to get to Justin's question and be cognizant of everyone's time. Justin, you can certainly unmute yourself, or I can talk about Jacinta, in the last part of the chat box. I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's asking about the organizational models you've experienced in different firms and the pros and cons of different leadership structures. Just wondering if you would want to talk about EDAW or AECOM or others, and how leadership and responsibilities may lay out in different type of firms.
Yeah. Well, look, my career, first 10 years was a different firm, but basically my career, the subsequent 30 years has essentially been with one firm, but it has felt like multiple careers within that. In terms of leadership models, I think the biggest contrast, if you are working in a very large firm, the structuring of leadership is often structured in what's called a matrix, which, and the purpose of that is to have the people who are really focused on practice, able to do that, and the people who are really focused on the operations able to focus on that. Prior to that, in EDAW, we grew. When I joined EDAW, I think we had 200 and a little under 200 people, and grew to about 1,600 people when we sold the firm to AECOM. And during that period, we didn't have a matrix, but we had people who came through and came up and through the firm mainly, and then they had an emphasis. If you became a principal, if you were promoted to principal, you had an emphasis, but you were expected to be able to have some degree of expertise in management, some degree of expertise in developing new business, and some degree of emphasis in practice. And some people had, were really skewed to one part of those three areas, some to others. I think that type of model is for a consulting firm is quite effective, very effective. And I would say even in a very large firm, you can never really let go of if you're, you've got to find work, you've got to be able to manage your projects, so you never really let go of that. But there's just in a very big firm, I would say a challenge in a very big firm is that there's just more layers of checking in relation to risk and checking in relation to budgets and so on. But the fundamentals actually remain the same. I think the big difference is just how big a firm you're operating in.
That's great. Well, we're a minute past. I'd like to hand it over to Krista to wrap up this session. I can't thank you enough, Jacinta, but Krista, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacinta, for your time today and for inspiring us and inspiring young professionals to just keep doing what we're doing. I really appreciated kind of your tie and your maps connecting us with Sydney, because I think it's been really easy to get really focused on our own community instead of looking at across the globe to see where we have similarities with other regions. And I know that area of the country also has a similar climate, and so we're dealing with a lot of similar issues. So I really appreciate that broader perspective. And so just want to say thank you again. Appreciate all of you for being here today and taking the time out and dedicating your lunch to listen to this session. And please look out for the rest of this series. Todd, who is the next one that's going to be presenting?
Yeah, our next presenter will be Tom Morose, who's the incoming National ASLA president.
Great.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thanks for being here. We appreciate your time, and thanks to Jacinta for presenting and all of your leadership in landscape architecture globally.
Oh, thanks everyone. Great to see everybody.
Okay. Thank
See you
you
next
all.
time.
All right. Bye-bye.